Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our next session of our learning skills program. And today we're going to be talking about the brain. As I said before, how do we possibly learn when we don't know how our brains work? So I want to show you very briefly and simplistically today how the brain works and how we can maximize our learning through knowing about that. Just to recap, remember we discussed in our last sessions that there are blocks to learning, and one of the biggest blocks are our attitudes. So bad attitudes like a flat tire. You can't go anywhere till you change it. So hopefully by now you've looked at your attitudes and how these might block you and what good attitudes you could start adopting and trying and see how that impacts on your learning skills. So I want to tell you that there is a secret to learning, and we can know it. Everything revolves around knowing about our brains. Our brains are the most amazing things. And our difficulty that we might have, or you might say, well, I can't remember. The difficulty is not with the capacity of our brains, but it's actually the way we use our brains. But if you don't know how to use them, how do we maximize that? And I promise you, this is information I wish I knew when I was at school. Because at school, you just muddle along and you hope that something sticks in your head so that when it's time to have examinations, you hope that something actually comes out. What we need to know is the brain is amazing. It actually has something like 86 billion neurons. Now, neurons are tiny little cells that transport information. And they transport from these cells down little tails, and it's all through electrical and chemical impulses. It passes information through. Now, just look at that. It's like the super highway, super network. I mean, just look at all those connections. And what we need to do is to make those connections. Now, those connections in the brain only form as we grow and we have experiences and we learn things. If you sat in a room and did nothing, you would find that your brain wouldn't develop very much, and you would be limited in those connections that are made. So the point is, we can make those connections and cause more of this superhighway to increase. It's very much like, they've described it like going through a forest and you're trying to make a pathway. At first it's hard, you've got to beat past all the bush and you get scratched and it's hard work. But the more you go over that area, eventually you have a footpath. That's easy to go. And it's the same, we'll see later in another video, but briefly now, by establishing these neural networks, the more we do something, the more we use them, the more established they become and the faster they go. So it's very much like a bicycle. You know, when you learn to ride a bicycle, at first it's like, well, get on the bike, now my foot must go here, my arm must go here, and we wobble and we fall off a couple of times. But every time we do it, it becomes easier and easier until it's almost automatic. And that's how our brain works, even with our learning subjects. Whether we like the subject or not, we're forming connections in our brain. And the more we form those connections, we go over the work and over the work. And I'll show you in another video the strategies we use. It becomes a superhighway. This information just goes whizzing through, and we can actually remember the information. And we grow our brains and our intelligence. I mean, how exciting is that? The big thing that we have to do is we have a part of our brain, it's called the hippocampus. And this structure is thought to be involved with learning and memory. So we've got to get information into our hippocampus. How do we do that? What happens how do you get information there? Well, first of all, we have to know that there are 3 memory systems we have. We have our sensory memory system, we have short-term memory or our working memory, and our long-term memory. So briefly, our sensory memory, perhaps if we look here, you can see there on your left, the sensory memory is things we see, we smell, we hear, we touch, we taste. So these are the things that our body picks up. Now that first sensory memory is unconscious. We're picking these things up all the time. But the brain's amazing because we would go nuts if we picked up everything that all our senses pick up. Our brain filters things for us. So we actually only pick up what is important at that time. And that then becomes conscious, and it now moves into the second system, which is our short-term memory or our working memory. So that's where, like right now, I'm working from my short-term memory because I'm busy thinking about information, but I'm also retrieving things out of my long-term memory that I've learned long ago. But basically, as I'm working right now, I'm working from my working memory. So when if something draws your attention in the environment, or you start learning and listening to something, you're working in your short-term memory. But we lose a lot of it. Thank goodness, because otherwise our brains would be clogged up. We wouldn't be able to move on. So when things pass, we forget about them, we move on to the next thing. So our brain, fortunately, loses a lot of information. But that's also unfortunate, because unless we do something specific, it needs to move over into our long-term memory. That's where we need to store it. And we need to get it there. And it doesn't just happen by chance to find its way into long-term memory. We have to do things to get it into that long-term memory. And then to be able to find it. Because it's one thing to store it, but we need to store it carefully. Otherwise, we're going to really look like a jumble up garage where everything's in a mess. You can see there the person has just thrown everything in. What are their chances of finding anything? Well, almost zilch, because you've got to scratch through everything. And our brain is actually like that. So we need to understand that if we use our brain and we just throw things in and hope something sticks somewhere, we're really not going to be able to learn properly. And what's very interesting with the brain is, and this is the bad news for you, or for most school children, there is no box for cramming. Now, how many of you and myself, when I was at school, we just decided to cram, goof off all the year, and then suddenly before the exam, we cram everything in, sit up the whole night. Let me tell you, that's such bad news for the brain, because the brain does not have a cramming box. So what we really need to do, sorry, now I've lost my PowerPoint after all that. There it is. Sorry, there it is back again. What we need to do is to know how to harness information and how to get information into our long-term memory. And that's what I'm going to share with you next time. And it's exciting things. I wish I had known it at school. When I was at university at UNISA, I learned these skills, and I promise you, I laughed my way through some of the examinations. One examination, I actually got 100% for. My husband says, how's that possible to get 100% for an examination? Well, because I used certain strategies that I never used at school. And I was able to really regurgitate the information in the exam room, and I got 100% for that. It was community psychology. I'll never forget, because it was quite a hard subject, but they told us how the exam was going to be structured, and through the use of these strategies, promise you, I laughed my way through that exam. So I'm excited to share this information with you, and I hope that you really are going to enjoy it. I'm also using this lockdown time to hone my skills on how to do these videos and to share with PowerPoint, and to do some editing. As you can see, it's less than perfect, but I'm learning too. So stay safe, go well, and tune in, watch the space for the next video. Right you are. Bye.